Hello, listeners. Welcome to the second installment of Geopolitical Cousins. Marko Papic and I come together to do almost 2 hours of commentary on everything going on in geopolitics. And also we close out with 30 minutes of a geopolitics of sporting events draft, not to be missed. You can email me at jacob@jacobshapiro.com with any comments or questions. Those emails will get to Marko as well. We're eventually going to set up an email for the podcast itself. I'm sure, by the way, that we missed lots of different sporting events from Latin America, from Sub-Saharan Africa, from Southeast Asia. So please tell us all the things that we missed and tell us how wrong we were. Shout out to Marko for making time. Me too. We had terrible weeks, but we wanted to keep up with the cadence. So we recorded on a Saturday morning, and we hope you appreciate the grit and the drive. So see you out there. All right, Marko has been very gracious. We were supposed to record yesterday, and I mean, it was an absolute clusterfuck of travel. Marko, I didn't tell you this. I was actually stuck in the LA airport for, it turned out, about 7 hours. I should have, if I'd known, I would have just called you, and you could have come, and we could have done the episode.
I would have brought you some sandwiches. You know, By the way, pet peeve about America. Turn the TikTok camera on.
Okay, turn it on. Starting early, guys.
Why can't we make sandwiches in America? Like, why can't we make sandwiches to go in America? What is this thing where you have a sandwich and it's got more salad than like a salad inside? It gets soggy. That's not how you make sandwiches. Just make sandwiches without any salad, no tomato, no lettuce. Put it on a shelf. It'll look much more appetizing. This is my pet peeve. You're stuck in an airport for 7 hours. You don't want to go to a restaurant and pay $700 for something. You just want to pick up a sandwich from a store. And they all look terrible. And this is why.
Yeah. They do. They all look terrible. I also have a pet peeve about this, which is, you know, on American Airlines, not the actual airline, but, you know, American carriers, I should say. When they give you a snack, it's always like, you know, almonds or Cheez-Its or chips or cookies, and it's all great. It's fine. But like, I always know that I'm in Europe because, you know, I usually land in Amsterdam or something like that to connect to where I'm going to Europe. And they give you like, you know, a beautiful egg salad sandwich on like fresh multigrain bread is the snack. And it's like, or if you're on Air France, you get like a nice fresh croissant with a,
that's
the
thing. Like, keep it simple. If you want to make a sandwich, they can stay good long. Don't put salads and tomatoes in it. Just keep it simple. Like, how is this not? Anyways, this is my pet peeve. We both travel a lot, so I feel for you. And I would have brought you a nice little sandwich, some coffee. We would have had a good time.
Well, I think, you know, when this podcast fails, you can start your sandwich company. I personally have my eyes set on Starbucks and the providers of coffee to all the airlines. I want somebody to be providing nice coffee to the airlines rather than the swill that we are forced to drink. But we are way off track here.
Yes, so we haven't even started. I actually got some feedback for our podcast, and one of them was like, "You guys are not on track." I'm like, "Oh boy, we can't fix that. That is unfixable."
Yeah, that's a feature, not a bug. So if you don't like our meandering conversation, maybe find another podcast. Sorry, I don't think we're going to be able to fix that. Especially not since it's 7 o'clock in the morning for you. It's 9 o'clock in the morning for me. I will probably get more hyper as this episode goes on because I'm literally caffeinating as we go, using the special mug that my mother-in-law gave me.
We're going to climax at the right time. That came off wrong, but we're just going to keep it.
It did. Yeah.
At the end, when we handle what we promised people, which is, of course, the most geopolitically relevant sporting events. But I think you have an agenda for us.
I do have an agenda. An agenda that we created together. It is not my agenda for us. But we're going to start this week. I think we have to start with the Houthis and what's been going on with Iran. Just a brief recap if you've been living underneath a rock. So that last weekend, the Trump administration ordered attacks on the Houthis in Yemen with airstrikes and cruise missiles and things like that. The Houthis responded with a couple attacks on U.S. ships in the Red Sea. That really pissed the United States off. So they came with more attacks against the Houthis, reports of over maybe 100 dead. It was in response to those attacks that Trump did his now infamous tweet where he threatened to rain hell down upon the Houthis. And also, perhaps more importantly, told Iran that if it helped the Houthis out at all, that they were basically going to be next, told Iran to sit on the sidelines. The Houthis have kept going. They launched a couple missiles at Israel, not a whole lot of damage, but they launched them so that they could say they launched them. And then crescendoing yesterday with the news that the Trump administration is deploying a second aircraft carrier to the Middle East. So the USS Harry Truman is already there, but its deployment has been extended by at least a month, and the USS Carl Vinson set to be joining it in the coming weeks after it finishes exercises in the East China Sea with the Japanese and the South Koreans. So I guess I don't know. I've been asked about this a couple times, Marco, and I felt somewhat like a geopolitical charlatan this week because my answer has been, well, I don't really know what's going on. It's either Trump is offering the stick to the carrot that he sent to the supreme leader of Iran last week, where he's saying, hey, what I really want is another nuclear deal. And if you don't listen to me, I'm going to bomb you. Or we're gearing up for maximum pressure and regime change and, finish the unfinished work from the first administration. And I very helpfully been telling my clients I'd put it at 50-50. So tell me that you have more clarity than I do on this.
I think, as always, I don't think President Trump has stable preferences. I think whether it's tariffs, whether it's trade war, whether it's anything other than immigration, I think that most of his preferences are sort of determined by the constraints he runs into. And I do think I actually take him seriously when he says he wants another nuclear deal. And I think that Iran knows this. Although their response, I think, was pretty lukewarm, right? I mean, they came back and were like, whatever, show us the money. The problem is, for those of you who are not following this closely, I mean, Iran has built up a stockpile of enriched uranium that they've been basically enriching for the past 4 years. And they have started to convert it into higher enriched uranium, which is only used for military purposes. So that's actually ramped up. And they're disclosing this to the rest of the world, so they're not really hiding it. I think that they're doing this not because they want to produce a nuclear weapon, but because they want to bargain with Trump. But they can also, they're trying to increase their chip stack by producing as large of a stockpile so that they can bargain it away in a deal. I think that's what's happening. They did that before with Barack Obama, and they're playing the same exact playbook, except they should know that President Trump does start negotiations with maximum pressure. So maximum pressure to me is not about regime change. It is about the deal, but it's about setting the terms of the deal to the U.S. advantage. Now, there's this component of the Houthis, which I've pointed out is very interesting. Everyone knows that the Houthis are an Iranian-aligned group in Yemen. Saudi Arabia fought a war with them that was backed and supported logistically by the United States. When Israel-Palestinian war started in Gaza, the Houthis, in solidarity with Gaza, started attacking shipping in the Red Sea. But what's interesting, to me, the most interesting, is they didn't attack a single installation in Saudi Arabia or ship in the Persian Gulf, and they could have. As I keep saying, like Houthi drones, their joysticks are not stuck in the south position. They don't have to just attack things in the Red Sea. They can also attack Saudi Arabia. They can also attack shipping in the Persian Gulf as well. And they didn't. And they didn't because there is a tacit, deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia that's kept the peace in the Middle East throughout the last 18 months of high risk. And I think that it's clear that it's still holding. And the Houthis have been very sort of strategic in just focusing on the shipping in the Red Sea. So I think that the U.S., anyways, I think that's what the U.S. is doing. I think President Trump is basically saying, like, look, I want a deal, but to get to it, I'm willing to use kinetic force. I will use military.
Yeah, to your point, so the Iranian response, so Ali Khamenei on Thursday said something along the lines of, the Americans should know that threats will get them nowhere when confronting Iran. And if they do anything to the Iranian nation, they will get, quote unquote, a hard slap. I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean. And Iran's foreign minister followed that up by saying that, yes, Iran had received a letter from President Trump in early March, that it was more of a threat than an offer to start negotiating. And also that apparently in the deal, and this is, I'm now citing Axios, there was a 2-month deadline for reaching the deal. And it didn't, there was no specification about the start or the end date or anything like that, but there is this 2-month period out there that Trump is talking about. And he did say on Fox News, like last week, that he hoped that there was going to be a deal, but that something was going to happen one way or another. And I'll quote the president here, because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing for them. And I also just want to underline what you said about the Iranian Saudi normalization, which happened under the auspices, at least from the PR front, of the Chinese. The Chinese were the ones who said that we put the Iranians and the Saudis together and now it's peaceful. And that happened back in March 2023. And I think the Houthi point that you made is all the more interesting because, Trump officials have been running around Saudi Arabia since he took power, ostensibly negotiating with the Russians in Riyadh. How many videos have I seen of Marco Rubio in Riyadh talking to the Russians or talking to somebody else? But theoretically, the Saudis are also part of this grand bargain. Maybe they know what's going on. Maybe they're watching aghast that the
They've been
Trump
trying.
administration is fanning the flames here. I don't know. Do you think that they're on board with this program, or do you think that they're holding their breath?
No. I don't think the Saudis are on board with this at all. I think that the Saudi leadership is very focused on, number one. And number one for them is attracting FDI into the country. And so they don't want a giant conflict. I mean, a conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, for those of you who are listening to this and are aghast at what's going on in Gaza, yes, the size, the volume is new, but that conflict's been going on in the Middle East for thousands of years. So if you think that the world has changed because of Gaza, that's wrong. It hasn't. But if the United States of America actually uses military force against Iran, that is a difference maker for a country like Saudi Arabia, which is sitting there trying to attract a lot of investment so that they can modernize. And so, yeah, I would say, Jacob, that actually Saudis have stated that they don't want the conflict between US and Iran, and they're trying to facilitate negotiations. I think the 2-month deadline is interesting. I mean, I think what President Trump is basically telling Tehran is that the ball is in their court, and quite frankly, it is. It's up to them to make the first move. It's up to them to make an offer. They're the ones that have increased the stockpile of uranium. Yes, it's President Trump that, abrogated the deal, that ended the deal. But, he's the leader of the United States of America. What does Iran really want? And I would also say that, Israel, Iran didn't really rattle the markets, didn't really rattle geopolitics. I mean, Israel and Iran exchanged, ballistic missile fire and so on in 2024, and it led to nothing. That's like children fighting in the house. This is a pissed off dad who had 4 hours to sleep, landed at 4 a.m., hasn't had a coffee, coming downstairs and being like, what's going on here? This is what's happening. Donald Trump is the dad. He's coming down the stairs and he's telling both kids, I don't care. You're going to stop. I'm here now. And so the US-Iran confrontation, I think, will be much more different than Israel-Iran confrontation.
Well, and to your point, the Houthis have done the most geopolitically significant thing since October 7th, arguably, because they're the ones that shut down Red Sea shipping. And unless you're a North Korean or a Russian, or you're willing to pay 500x on insurance, I don't know what the actual number is, you're not going through the Red Sea. You're still not going through the Red Sea. So they really are the ones that have shaped things here. And they're the longer that Red Sea shipping stays closed. And I'm not convinced that, do you think Red Sea shipping would return even if there was an Iranian US nuclear deal? It's sort of, if you'll forgive the pun, it seems like that ship has sailed. Oh, God.
Or not sailed. No, I think it would. I mean, look, I think US is still by far has the best, global power projection. So if the US decides to open the Red Sea shipping, it will open Red Sea shipping. And it will, bomb the Houthis. I was going to say the medieval age, but I think they're already in it. So it will, like Bronze Age. And the other issue also is that it has far superior military projection than Israel. Israel doesn't even have strategic bombers. People don't understand this. When Israel has to attack another country, it has to use fighter jets. Let's not forget that. And also, Israel doesn't have infinite cruise missile and ballistic missile supply. It just doesn't. U.S. kind of does.
You're right, but Marco, they do have the market cornered on pager-based IEDs.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So, I mean,
Yes, I mean, yeah. If it was 1987, Israel's got it. It's a hegemon.
It was 1987 in Lebanon. Maybe it's 1987 in Iran. I'm just saying.
Yeah. And it is. And it kind of is. It is. I mean, Iran is going to confront the U.S. with F-4s. So I think that, I think this is one of those situations where the risk reward for Trump is actually pretty skewed to reward if he does use kinetic force. And I think it was interesting because over the last 3 months, you've seen oil prices kind of come down in expectations of Russia-Ukraine deal, which I think is kind of silly because it's not like Russia can produce more oil because the Russia-Ukraine deal happens. So you're not going to get more oil barrels in the world because there's a deal in Ukraine, whereas you can get less oil barrels in the world if US and Iran start, fighting. But it's going to be short, and it's going to be something like the Operation Praying Mantis. You can fact check me. I think it was 1988.
Yeah.
So Operation Praying Mantis was a similar move when the Reagan administration effectively, got sick and tired of Iran disrupting shipping in the Persian Gulf. And in 2.5 days, sunk something like 70% of their navy. So, this is where, if President Trump wants a distraction, by the way, from domestic concerns about a recession, this is a beautiful one. This is a simple one. And I think that he will be, I think that the odds basically are increasing for a slew of reasons. Iranian intransigence, this conflict in the Middle East has been dragged out, and also just the inability of Iran to retaliate militarily in any way, shape, or form against the U.S.
Yeah, it also gets to the heart of, Trump has been talking about $50 barrel oil, and the U.S. energy industry has been complaining about that because they say that that's too low. And if you look at the last couple of CPIs, like energy is what is bringing CPI down. Like everything else is actually still pretty elevated, but because energy is down, like it's bringing the CPI down with it. And Trump seems to want it down even more and wants U.S. Producers to export even more. So maybe it works for him to say, oh, but if there's a conflagration with Iran, then it's not my fault that energy prices went up, and it's USA, and maybe he hides that with that. I mean, there's a lot in there too. I don't know how the Trump energy policy works in that
Well,
context, whether they want more barrels or not.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a big question. There's that Scott Bessent 333 plan. For those of you who are just listening to this podcast for the fun of it, there is this idea that Trump wants to unleash energy supply and bring inflation down through cheap energy. But I also think that Donald Trump can chew gum and walk at the same time. What I mean by that is that if oil prices go up over a course of 6-8 months, I don't think he's losing sleep over that. So will this obsession with low energy prices prevent the U.S. from attacking Iran? No. Because again, it's not an invasion, right? Like we have to discern this. This isn't an invasion of Iraq. This is what America does best. Bombing a country from 30,000 feet. Nobody has ever done that better in history. U.S. knows how to do this. And so, yeah, I think the odds of this are rising. And unfortunately for Iran, I also don't think that there's anything they can do to really change this. I don't think that there's anything that they can do to almost prevent it. I think that this may be a moment when the U.S. is just locked in on this. And I think a lot of people will say Trump is doing this to support his domestic approval rating. If there's a recession, it does help you if there's a geopolitical conflagration. Bush Jr. and Bush Sr. both went through a recession with approval rating rising because of geopolitics. For Bush Sr., it was Gulf War I. For Bush Jr., it was 9/11. Truman, Berlin airlift, same thing. All three of them suffered later from Bush Jr. Not so much. I mean, he won the re-election, but Bush Sr. definitely got hit with approval rating decline after Gulf War I success, and Truman, although Berlin airlift helped him, eventually also succumbed to the pain of that recession that was hidden away by geopolitics. So maybe President Trump thinks that this is a way to do it. I think the press will obviously say he's deflecting, but I don't know. I mean, if Vice President Harris had won the election, the fact of the matter is Iran has this huge stockpile of enriched uranium. Like something has to come to a head, if you will. And I think we're in that moment right now. So I do think listeners should expect some form of a conflict between Iran and the U.S. I don't think it will just stay in the realm of words.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That was one of the most shocking things in the entire Harris campaign to me. You might remember she went on 60 Minutes and they asked her what I'm forgetting the exact phrase of the question.
What's
but it was
the biggest threat to the U.S.? Yes.
And it was Iran.
Enemy. Yeah.
And I wanted to light what is left of my hair on fire. I was like, that's Iran is the threat. Anyway, there's a lot to unpack already in what we've just talked about. But I want to go to what you said about, yes, the United States is very good at bombing from however many thousands of miles away. But what's the goal then? Like, is it regime change? Is it just knock out enough of the nuclear facilities that you've set them back 10 years? Like, what do you think would be the goal? Or is it really just political symbolism?
Well, I think that it would start with something a little bit more controlled so that you force Iran to give you a deal. Like, no, we're the United States of America is what Trump is saying. I'm not going to start the negotiations. You start the negotiation. And then, Tehran responds, no, we're not going to do it. And then you do something. So remember, before COVID, Trump did assassinate, General Soleimani. I think that was January 2020.
It was.
And General Soleimani was not just the commander of the IRGC. He was also one of the most popular, people in Iran. I mean, he was rumored to be the next presidential candidate even. And so the U.S. assassinates him while negotiating with Iran. We now know that the United States was actively negotiating as it was assassinating one of the most popular policymakers, if I can call General Soleimani that. And then Iran retaliates by basically sending missiles at U.S. bases, injuring some servicemen, to which I think Donald Trump responds on Twitter, that's cool. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. It says something like, I understand this was their response. I consider this matter now closed. Harris brings this up in the debate, by the way. Vice President Harris brought this up in the debate and said that President Trump was callous and glib about American servicemen being injured, which is a ludicrous point that she made. Obviously, what do you want? World War III? Like, relax, Anyways, the point is that that's how Trump negotiates with countries like Iran. That's how he does it. So what do I mean? I mean that the United States is likely to use kinetic force against Iran somewhere in the region, not against the Houthis, against Iran. That will be the opening gambit in negotiations. You slap Canada with a 25% tax and tell them they're going to become a 51st state. That's how you do it with a country like Canada. With Iran, I think it will be some form of kinetic action. And then if Iran doesn't respond appropriately, then I do think that President Trump could actually take us towards the ultimate sort of confrontation, which would be to attack, nuclear facilities and set them back. In the United States, because it has bunker buster technology that Israel doesn't, because the U.S. did not supply Israel with that technology, the U.S. can actually do quite a significant amount of damage. Now, I do think that this will be all done. If this takes place over the next 2 months, Jacob, it's also going to coincide with a date that most of our clients are freaking out about, which is April 2nd. April 2nd is when the big tariffs are going to be announced. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're just like working out, having breakfast, driving somewhere, like this is the big one, April 2nd. If you haven't kept up with the news, April 2nd is when the world will freak out because Trump is going to announce absolutely massive tariffs. It's an opening bid. He's going to lower them. That's my view. It's a negotiating bid. But it does kind of make sense to also have a geopolitical conflict going on at the same time, because it can kind of distract the public from the fact that their, groceries and Target and Walmart items are going to go up potentially 30-40% in price.
Yeah. So the Trump corollary to Roosevelt would be announce tariffs and slap Iran across the face, I guess. But I think what you're saying is you think that the goal of an attack against Iran would actually be a nuclear deal. That there wouldn't, maybe it would get to that if it escalates or if it spirals out of control, but that you think that he's applying the leverage here because what he really does want is some kind of deal, which, there's still a few more things to unpack before we move to some of our next topics, because I know we have to. But one of the things you said at the very beginning was that President Trump does not have stable preferences. And I feel like his supporters often say that you're right, generally speaking, but his most stable preference is that he doesn't like war. He's not a war maker. He loves peace. He wants to avoid kinetic conflict in general. And I think the other part, there's another wing of his administration that has also very much pitched all of the moves so far as hey, we're putting the Russia-Ukraine war to bed. We're getting rid of the Middle East nonsense so we can go focus on China, because China is where the really big threat is. And part of the problem with the strategy is if you get, if you're in this 2-month deadline and now you're bombing the Iranians and now you've got how many carrier groups in the Red Sea, like China's, like, you're not going to be able to exert any pressure on China. Like you're going to have to sort of wait there. So I don't know. Do you think that stable preference thing is correct? Do you think that there is a China move? Take that wherever you want.
I think so. Yes, I do think that Trump and many of his supporters, it's funny, they've almost adopted the liberal Democratic Party agenda when it comes to geopolitics, and by the way, there's this really undercurrent. I talked to some of our mutual friends who are veterans, by the way, from back in our day at Stratfor. A a lot of veteran community doesn't want wars because they suffered in it, and there's this like whole thing where like I was talking to a veteran of the Iraq global war on terror, and he said like a buddy of mine once asked like, why are we here? Like while they were fighting, like, hey, why are we in Iraq? And he didn't know how to answer. Like, I actually don't know. So there is this undercurrent of like, in a way, I don't know if I can really even say this publicly, but like liberal anti-war sentiment amongst Trump and his supporters. But we can't be myopic about that or too binary, Jacob, because again, attacking Iran from 30,000 feet, there's very few ways that can go wrong. I'm sorry to say that. I know that everyone's going to be up in arms and say like, oh, but they can do this, they can do that, they can launch attacks on Saudi Arabia from Iraqi militias. And it's like, yeah, they can, but every move they do will put Iran deeper and deeper into a very, very nasty hole. And that's why go to Wikipedia and read about Operation Praying Mantis. Ronald Reagan had enough. He bombed Iran's navy primarily, and Iran just kind of had to take it. Iran versus US is Incas versus conquistadores, honestly. Like technologically speaking, there's just nothing they can do. And as long as President Trump understands that invading Iran would be like massive folly, which, anyone knows, it can be a pretty limited military confrontation. That's why I think he will have a very, very low threshold to reach for the kinetic sort of lever, because the downside risks to the U.S. are not that great. I mean, yes, there's a lot of scenarios out there. You can Google them. Can Iran close the Straits of Hormuz? The answer is yeah, they can do what the Houthis did to Red Sea, and that would obviously cause oil prices to go massively higher. But if they do that, they only deepen the commitment by the United States and Trump to keep bombing them from 30,000 feet, and they cannot do anything about it. They have some S-400s, or actually S-300s from Russia. They've got some ability to kind of protect their airspace, but maybe against Israel, although that's even doubtful. Against the United States, it will be Incas versus conquistadores. And that's why the more they try to fight back, the more their abilities will be degraded by decades. So, I think that is just a perfect setup for Trump to look presidential, militaristic in a controlled setting, I think. And I think that it's going to be very difficult for him to restrain himself from doing that, even though he is, focused on peace, as he says. I don't disagree with that. I just think this will be very tempting.
Yeah, I think you're underestimating the Iranians a little bit, not in the sense that they have great military capabilities, but that regime is under pressure, and the more you go after them, the more you give the regime some of its power back in general. But I hear you on Operation Praying Mantis. By the way, I was just Googling it while you were talking. I didn't know this. The largest of the U.S. Navy's 5 major surface engagements since World War II.
Yeah.
Its first exchange of anti-ship missiles with opposing ships, and its only sinking of a major surface combatant since World War II. So not a small...
No. But people don't know about it. People don't know about that one. And by the way, there were lessons learned from that one. And the lesson learned is that the Iranian regime is not irrational at all. They were like, oh, okay, dad came downstairs, didn't have coffee, and is mad. Just shut up and take your licks.
Well, and I think it's part of the reason that drew them to the logic of a nuclear deterrent. It has probably also shaped their, grand strategy for 40 years since then to try and avoid that kind of thing in the future. The development of proxy groups that take the hits rather than Iran itself. Like,
brilliant point. You're a brilliant point, Jack. Yeah, you do not want to get involved in a conventional war against the United States if you're Iran. It's a bad idea. So, but I think this is a big issue, and I'm glad we started with it and spent 30 minutes on it, because I do think my view has been, since President Trump got elected, like, it's Iran. That is the big geopolitical issue coming up. But I think I would have the same view as if Harris had won the election, because of what you said. I mean, the entire United States military intelligence apparatus has had this on their bulletin board. Like, after the election, we got to deal with this nuclear stockpile, uranium stockpile in Iran, one way or another. It's got to be done.
Yeah. There is a symmetry too to the first Trump administration, which is, the first Trump administration went after North Korea, and it ended with Kim Jong, fat face, and Trump like exchanging their letters and talking to each other and things like that. But there were two, carrier groups deployed there. Like there was a lot of pressure, and in the end, nothing ended up happening. Like there wasn't a
Yeah.
war, and North Korea already has nuclear weapons, so maybe that was part of the
But I
calculus
think,
there. But
but you know what? I also think that your point about domestic politics is huge. I think domestic politics for Kim Jong Un are far simpler than they are for Iran. Like he can do
yes,
whatever he wants.
yes, of
He can
course.
kowtow to President Trump and then tell the people in North Korea that it was the opposite. So it was far simpler for him. By the way, that exchange also, you forgot, gave us the greatest statement in geopolitical history, perhaps,
Which
which is
one?
that my button is bigger than your button.
Oh, I thought his post mortem, or what do you call it? What's his eulogy for Omar Bakr al-Baghdadi was also up there.
Okay,
he,
that's
he
fair.
died like a dog or
Yeah,
whatever.
I don't know. I like a world leader of arguably the greatest country in the world comparing button sizes was just, that's when you know that you need to launch a podcast on geopolitics for a living. I think
Exactly.
that was the moment when I was like, wait a minute, this is not serious anymore. This is now, WWE. This is MMA. It's time to go the podcast route.
Yeah. All right, Marco, I'm going to pull off a segue here. It's going to be a brilliant segue. This is why they pay me the big bucks. So if everything proceeds like you say, and I'm glad that you have more confidence on this, because as I said in my sort of intro, like I'm very ambiguous about what's about to happen with U.S. Iran. I'm glad to have some of your directionality. But one thing I will say is that if what you're saying comes to pass, the country that will benefit the most from it is Turkey. And Turkey seems to be benefiting on all sides, whether it's, the Russians losing their Assad ally, Europe batting its eyelashes at the Turks. Now you've got Iran that's going to be taken off the board. Lots of great things happening for Turkey in general. And it was a big week geopolitically for Turkey as well. The head, well, not the head of, but the mayor of Istanbul, his name is Ekrem. I'm going to butcher it, but I think it's Imamoglu. I think that's how you pronounce that. Was arrested, one of 87 people arrested on charges of rampant corruption and for aiding the PKK terrorist group by recruiting its sympathizers. The Turkish lira plunged more than 10%, although it recovered a little bit. Turkish stocks were down. Turkish stocks, by the way, one of the best performers in the year, one of the best performers in the world over the last couple of years, but down significantly on the news. Also interesting to note because President Erdogan himself was mayor of Istanbul and was arrested in 1997 for ostensibly he read a poem at a political rally that had some religious overtones to it. Turns out the poem that he said he quoted, it wasn't actually in the poem. The words that he quoted were, the mosques are our barracks, the domes are helmets, the minarets are bayonets, and the faithful are soldiers. Kind of tells you everything you need to know kind of right there. But so maybe let's back into that. Do you think that this is a good thing for Turkey, as I do? And what do you make of the political melodrama unfolding in Turkey here amidst all the geopolitical things happening with them?
I mean, I think that what's going on in Turkey is just par for the course in 2025. So, I spent a lot of time talking about multipolarity and how we're back to the 19th century, sort of where there's nobody's really in charge. We're not in a Cold War. That's an incorrect view. It's not a bipolar world. And that'll be a recurring theme that our listeners are going to get sick of at some point. But I think there's another thing going on, which is that we're moving beyond the legal authority, like where basically legitimate authority is passed from institutions, constitution, and legal to the policymakers. We are now fully in the realm of what Max Weber, the sociologist, called charismatic authority. And when the leader of the United States of America, the most powerful country in the world still, is doing whatever he wants domestically, like why wouldn't Erdogan do the same? Like that's what I actually take from this. Now, this is kind of unfair to Trump. This is like blaming the Trump administration for everything, including like your inability to lose weight or give up caffeine. Like it was Trump. And so I don't want to blame Trump for what's going on in Turkey, but I'm confounded and confused as to why the lira would tank. Like, why? Like, this is the world we live in 2025. You arrest your opponents, you kind of ignore the rules of the game, you ignore constitutions, you ignore legal authority, you do whatever you want, you control and manipulate the media. Like, I'm a little bit surprised as to, why anybody would think that Erdogan would behave differently.
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. So the first is that the last time that Erdogan was really meddling in Turkish domestic politics, he was doing so to shove unorthodox fiscal and monetary policy down Turkey's throat. And foreign investors hated it and ran to the exits. And it's only in the last 12, 14 months since he won that last presidential election, since he went back to orthodoxy at the monetary level, sort of reestablished, I won't say the independence of the central bank, but put a grown-up in charge of the Turkish central bank and let him do what he was supposed to do with interest rates rather than citing the Quran for all the things that the central bank governor should be doing. Remember, he fired like 3 or 4 central bank governors over a period of time. So I think maybe what was going on with the knee-jerk reaction was foreign investors had allowed themselves to get a little optimistic about Turkey again. And then, here's Erdogan doing something. Oh my God, this means maybe he's going to go back to meddling with the central bank. And I think one of the most important things that happened this week was the central bank came out and raised interest rates and said, no, like we are going to be very orthodox about this and we are going to nip this in the bud. And I think that's why you saw Turkish equities and also the lira stabilize a little bit. But I do think you're right that a lot of foreign investors, frankly, are unsophisticated. The herd was, maybe Turkey's getting a little better. Like maybe Erdogan's going to leave things alone a little bit. And as soon as they saw a headline, it was like, oh shit, like we were wrong. We have to sort of get out. If you're thinking about Turkey in the long run, you're exactly right. Like these sorts of things are par for the course.
They are. And I don't think the one has to do with the other, like, I mean, Erdogan may have like learned his lesson from touching the stove, getting burned too many times by meddling with unorthodox fiscal policy, and he has been doing that for basically 20 years. So I think that if you're an investor in emerging markets, but quite frankly, again, even in developed markets, you're gonna have to, I think, in 2025, kind of raise your threshold for what level of charismatic leadership you're gonna have to deal with. Like, this is just the world we live in. I mean, the United States of America has a tech oligarch, like putting in place policies. Like, this is literally what's happening in the US. So, you're going to have to deal with a little bit of you're going to have to get dirty in the rest of the world as well in order to generate alpha. Yeah. And this is where, I think that there's this real debate in the investment community whether, democratic governance matters or not. And the quantitative analysis of this suggests that yes, it does, except in commodity bull markets, where you should just throw all that nonsense out the window and just invest in dictatorships. Now, obviously, Turkey's not a commodity producer. My point is not,
and not necessarily a dictatorship.
Well, and I don't want to make this a glib point about like oil prices or something, but the point is, like democracy kind of matters, unless there is something else going on in the world that makes it not matter. And I think that there is something else going on in the world that will not make governance matter. And it's like collapse of the US dollar in terms of its value. As the dollar declines, if it continues to decline as it has so far, and we can dedicate a whole podcast to this at some other point, but if the dollar declines, there's going to be a whole slew of countries in emerging markets that maybe don't have the greatest institutions, but they're going to benefit because they're going to be able to lower their interest rates, boost domestic output. It's going to be their commodity prices that they produce are going to go higher. Like, there's a whole slew of chain effects that where you can have 5 to 10 years where it doesn't matter if leaders of these countries are kind of corrupt or, have poor governance. And a lot of investors who are uncomfortable with that will miss out on that alpha.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I hadn't thought of that, honestly. And part of the reason I haven't thought about it is because I'm sort of out on an island here right now thinking that maybe the dollar is going to strengthen, not weaken. But I think you're right that we should devote a whole episode to the dollar, because Turkey was punished in recent years, not just because of Erdogan's unorthodox fiscal and monetary policy, but because it was more exposed to a stronger dollar than arguably any other emerging market in the world. The amount of dollar-denominated debt that the Turks gorged themselves on in the 2010s really, really hurt. And Erdogan's a really interesting figure because if you go back to his early career, he was signing deals with the IMF and he was globalization's poster child and doing all the things. And then he's citing the Quran for monetary policy. And now he's back over here. So he really is a chameleon in that sense. But before we turn to sort of the next thing, just, I want to come back to the Iran part of this because the weaker that Iran gets, the more the Middle East is Turkey's. The last 100, 150 years is really an aberration. If you look at the long history of the Middle East, it's about forces in Istanbul or Constantinople and forces in Iran or Persia balancing against each other, and everybody sort of getting smushed between them. And ironically, the United States upset a relatively stable balance of power when it took Iraq off the board in the Second Gulf War. And in some sense, U.S. foreign policy since then has been about trying to put together the balance of power again. And it has failed in numerous ways. It's blown up in the United States' face in all kinds of ways, whether it's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the rise of ISIS, blah, blah, blah. But if the United States just left the region alone and left it to its own devices, probably what would emerge is a balance between Iranian-backed forces on one side and Turkish-backed forces on the other side. And the more the United States puts its foot on Iran's throat, the more it's just opening up the Middle East for Turkish power in general, which is good for the Turkish economy, which is good for Turkish power, but it also sets Turkey on a collision course with the United States, I think, in the long run, because the United States does not want a Mediterranean power that can project power into Europe and into the Middle East to be in control. So I think that's one thing to watch out for. And the second, this is going to hit with your Serbian background. The poem that Erdogan read from in 1997 when he was arrested, I don't know if you know this, but the poem was written in 1912. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce this poet's name, but I'll put it in the show notes. And he was trying to rally the then Ottoman soldiers to battle against a combined invasion force of Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece, and they absolutely kicked the Ottomans' butts.
Yes,
it's incredible on the map. It was sort of a prelude to some of what was about to happen in World War I. Yeah, just incredible. And I say that to say also because I'm talking about the expansion of Turkish power, and it's not just going to be south and into the Middle East. Because I think Erdogan also has his eyes north and on repairing and taking back some of those lands that he got pushed out from. Just look at that visit that he did with the Polish prime minister. What was that, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, where he was talking about how Turkey is the key to the EU not dying, basically said that with the Polish prime minister. So he's looking north too.
But what I would say, though, is that we shouldn't get maybe too medieval about this, And what I mean by that is there are many countries in the region that would welcome Turkey playing a bigger role. So for example, Serbia has a great relationship with Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
Despite this kind of history of obviously Serbia was, colonized by the Turks. I mean, that's probably a wrong term to use, but yeah, I mean, it was under Ottoman rule for 500 years. And yet, the current modern Serbia has a great relationship with Turkey and loves balancing Europe and Russia and China and Turkey and the US. So, will the US and Turkey get on a collision course? Or maybe will the United States be kind of willing to, give up some of its constant monitoring of the Middle East to, tentative ally, if you will? I don't know. I think Turkey could play a stabilizing role, is what I'm saying. Who's going to deal with the Syria mess? It's a mess. Why not outsource that to Turkey? Give it to them as a project. Say, look, if you do well in this project, you can do more. You can be a global power. Just stabilize Syria. Make sure it doesn't become a den of terrorism, on your front door, and just let's go from there. So maybe in a multipolar world, the more stable, confident of regional powers you have, the easier it is to produce equilibria. That's another way to kind of think about it.
Yeah, I'm going to push back a little against you, though, because it's not that we're outsourcing the Syria problem to Turkey. Turkey took that for itself and won the long game with Russia. Turkey said, we are handling this. Thank you very much. And that's fine, because you're right. Nobody cares about Syria. And if Turkey wants to deal with that mess, fine. God bless you. What happens when Turkey then says, okay, and now we will also take care of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, And we will also be the ones ensuring that Red Sea shipping continues. And maybe we'll also be the ones who control shipping in the Suez Canal. Like we'll be the defenders there, and we'll work with the Egyptians. And by the way, Gulf states, like we need your continued influxes of cash to prop up our unorthodox monetary policy. And if you don't give them, like we can support some groups that are not so friendly to you. Like I don't think it's a stretch to see how those tentacles start to impinge on even U.S. power in a multipolar world.
But I think you're just looking at the downside. You're not looking at the upside, which is that we will have more to talk about on this podcast if there's another player in the world. So there you go.
Oh, and dude, the upside is Turkey. I've been bullish on Turkey for years, and it's been one of my really great calls. Turkey is great. They're going to the moon. I'm totally there. Speaking of a country that this has not been such a good call so far since I got optimistic about them, and sort of on the flip side of emerging markets, this is something I also wanted to make sure we talked about because I don't think it got a whole lot of play in Western press, is what happened in Indonesia over the course of the past week. And this is it's not like it all suddenly happened. This is another one of those slow burn stories. So if you've been following Indonesian politics, you had this guy Prabowo who won the election last year. He's a former associate in the military dictatorship who has since sort of rehabilitated himself as this friendly TikTok character. And everybody was afraid that he was going to be super populist or super authoritarian. And we've got some of the first shoes that are dropping here. So this week, Indonesia's parliament passed revisions to their country's military law, which allows civilian posts for military officers. That's a big deal, again, because Indonesia's recovering from a military dictatorship. So when you start saying, oh, the military can come back into civilian politics, like should send a little shiver down your spine. The defense minister said that because of the strategic environment, as well as quote unquote geopolitical changes, the Indonesian military had to transform and had to, be involved in things besides war without neglecting the principles of democracy and civilian supremacy. Okay, that's nice. Earlier in the week, even before we had this military law that was reformed, you had Indonesian markets tanking because maybe the finance minister was going to lead the government, maybe they weren't going to. You've got the Indonesian government sort of intervening, saying that companies can buy back their stocks, that the central bank had to conduct a lot of currency intervention to calm markets. So just a lot of things here in general, one of the worst performing markets on the week. And this is a country that in a multipolar world, I've been very optimistic about because Indonesia has a lot going for it, but not a particularly good week there. So I'll let you cook on that for a minute, or we can go back and forth.
No, I think there's nothing really to cook for me. I mean, I would still be in a secular sort of view, be optimistic about Indonesia. It has a huge population, 300 million people. It's proven that it can be quite firm and antagonistic towards global powers and win. Famously, it imposed this export tax on its raw nickel exports. So he basically told China, you're going to have to pay higher price unless you move your refining industry into Indonesia. And this was interesting because if you do this to Trump, he's going to slap tariffs on you. What China did is it spent $20 billion building Indonesia's nickel refining industry. So Indonesia has proven to be able to kind of like, fight for its bread. And so I think that what's happening over the past couple of weeks with the markets, again, investors are, looking at what's going on domestically. But what's going on domestically in Indonesia is similar to what's going on domestically in Turkey. This is the world we live in. We are moving away from a form of authority that was based on law and institutions, and we're moving towards a lot more of a sort of a charismatic world. We're also moving to a world where the government has to enforce industrial policy that's shaped by the geopolitical threat environment. I mean, the United States of America has effectively taken Made in China 2025 and made it its own. Like if you think what the US is doing domestically, the US has adopted Chinese industrial policy, like almost verbatim. And so why wouldn't, Turkish president go after his rivals? Why wouldn't Indonesia decide to have a greater role for the military? And so, yeah, I think that this is just the world we live in. But I think if you're an investor, or anyone trying to assess whether these countries are going to be successful over the next 5 to 10 years, I don't think it's going to be based on the adoption of common law and respect for, legal authority. I just don't think that that's going to necessarily matter as much in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is because it goes back to your point about democracy, because I mean Erdogan in Turkey has plenty of authoritarian tendencies, and I'm not trying to um, sweep under the rug all the things that he has done to weaken Turkish democracy. Like, yes, he has limited expression of political dissent, and yes, he's gone after opposition parties and he's arresting his rivals. Imamoglu's not the first one. He's gone after the Kurds, all these different ways.
He's gone after public sector workers.
Yeah, like all sorts of things. But the dude keeps winning elections. And he's been winning elections for 30 years because he correctly understood that Turkish society had changed and that a secular republic that was radically secular had ignored this rising class of, Islamic, socially conservative folks in the interior, and that the future of Turkey was about a fusion of secular power in Istanbul with the heart of Anatolian power and putting those things together. And he's had his finger on that pulse for a long time. And it's why the opposition can groan and complain and talk about the disadvantages against it. He keeps winning elections. He won the last one pretty handily as well. It's a little different than what's happening in Indonesia, because I'm not sure you can say the same thing about Prabowo. I don't have a clear through narrative about how Prabowo has his finger on the pulse of Indonesian society, and really he's helping a majority come through what is a very diverse and complex society. He rather is functioning in a much more immature is too pejorative a word, but a state that does not have the coherence that the Turkish state has, that doesn't really function like a nation state, that has all these disparate parts and languages and sects and ethnic groups and all these other sorts of things. And he's sitting on top of it now as this former military guy and being a populist and promising free lunch to every mother and child in the country and putting all these people in the cabinet. Like, that's not a narrative. And that now he's welcoming the military back into civilian life. It's much harder for me to create a positive thread there. So I'm ironically saying maybe I'm not as worried about Turkey from that point of view, whereas the encroachment of the Indonesian military on Indonesian governance or democracy, that I think is actually a negative. I think one of the reasons Indonesia's done so well is because it has enjoyed like the power of its 300 million people all participating. And if that's going to get circumscribed so that the Indonesian government is about rewarding the ruling class, like that's a narrative that I don't like so much, separate from the democratic concern.
I just, I don't know if Joko Widodo, the previous president, was less populist though. So that's where I would say, what is Indonesia really backsliding on its democracy? I mean, yes, I think objectively you are correct. It is. Military is getting more involved given the history. We can infer a lot of negative things from that. I just think that what does all of this mean? And I think what it all means is that if every single country in the world is kind of doing this, it is difficult to isolate anyone and say, hey, this country here is doing it the wrong way. I think that we're all going to have to basically have a much higher threshold for what causes us to get negative.
Yeah, no, that's an important point. I appreciate you. Like, populist is a bad word. You're right that Jokowi was just as, if not more, populist than Prabowo. But I think the difference between them is that Jokowi had a sense of what Indonesia's future was going to look like, and was trying to build a unified future for a majority of Indonesian people. Whereas Prabowo, he's governing like people feared, which is, I'm from the old military dictatorship and I miss the good old days, and I would like for my military friends to be in control of these businesses and to be rewarded. So it's not about right or wrong. It's about Indonesia's much more interesting to me if you've got 300 million people whose national identity is congealing around a strong leader, not if it's going back 30 years so that some former military guru can now reward all of his military bros and create state-owned military companies that you have to pay off if you want access to the Indonesian market. Like, if I'm, for my investor brain, Jokowi's populism was much more attractive than whatever Prabowo's doing right now.
I like it. This is like 7-minute segue Indonesia. Some nuggets here. I love it.
It is. And I don't know how many of our ag listeners are going to be listening, but I will say, if you are a U.S. dairy exporter, I keep saying this, forget about China, all the negative things I just said about Indonesia. This is your market, guys. Like, this is the one. This is the one with 300 million
but
people.
Jacob, this is what I also mean. This is also why I'm willing to look over this. You've got population, you've got dollar decline potentially, let's say I'm right. You've got a commodity bull market, at least in EV related stuff. Like, who cares? I mean, look, all my professors in political science departments have just collectively lit themselves on fire and said, like, what? Democracy, rule of law, these things matter. And I'm like, like dollar declines, commodity go up, population growth is strong in Indonesia. Like, I mean, if he rewards some of his buddies, like let the man have some fun, like and this is interesting because these macro forces are so fascinating. When macro context is positive, it's like a tide that just covers all of the gnarly rocks and crevices and waste and garbage. And then at some point when that tide pulls back, we'll be sitting here in 2032 when Indonesian market crashes 60%, and we'll say like, you see, it was the democratic backsliding. But that's all I'm saying. So
it's not about the democratic backsliding. It's about all the policies that you talked about that Indonesia's betting from probably don't happen if somebody like Prabowo is in charge. And his rise, and this is where Indonesia is in danger of Dutch disease, because you're right, they have all these different commodities that are really critical, and they've set up policy in such a way that the Indonesian state and also the Indonesian economy is going to benefit more than a lot of countries that in the past China would have just come in and taken the nickel and all these other things and run. The problem is they set up this great policy. They were ready for the moment. But now here comes Mr. Military Fat Cat, who's like, instead of this going to the building of the Indonesian economy, I would like this.
But I'm not sure.
I would like this for my buddies.
Right, but we don't know that that's going to be the case. All I'm saying is like,
no, we don't.
And anyways, I don't want to speak out of turn because we need to see what happens. But in some of these kind of countries at this level of development, people in the military may actually be the most competent. I'm just going to leave that aside, though. I don't want to make that claim. But yeah, I think the difference between our views, just for those of you who are listening, is Jacob is saying like, hey, listen, like who's running these countries matters, and I'm kind of being hyperbolic over here on the other side and saying like, I don't care. If the macro context is positive, if these big forces that Indonesia has no control over are actually a wind in its sails, like, my chocolate Labrador can run the country. So anyways, that's the disagreement here. I'm just highlighting it, for everyone to know.
That's good. What is your chocolate Labrador's name?
Actually, you know what? My chocolate Labrador, who I refer to all the time, actually passed away in 2020. His name was Brian.
Brian.
Yeah, Brian. I have a new dog. If you hear him barking, he is a Pyrenees Border Collie mix, and he eats people. He's very, very mean.
Okay. Well,
so he can't run anything. He couldn't run anything. He would be just a dictator.
If you need help with, recloning Brian, I believe the president of Argentina has some experience with cloning his old dogs and communing with them. They apparently communicate political policy to him. So maybe you should call Milei and say you've got a problem that you need help with.
Hey, man, like Brian would have been a great leader. I think he would have been a great leader. Yeah.
And tell him if he can help you with this, pet cloning startup, that he can issue Brian coin, and then Argentina's future can be helped by this new crypto. Anyway, I won't go too far down that rabbit hole. I want to keep us a little bit on track, and maybe we won't get to our full list, but I think we should touch Chinese consumption before we get to play with sports, and maybe we'll add in one or two other topics. But arguably, the biggest macro question in the world is whether China goes to stimulus. I don't know if you agree with that or not. And since Q3, Q4 last year, we've been getting signals that, are they finally cranking it up? Is China finally changing? They've announced all these different plans that have fallen completely short and that the market hasn't been impressed with. But we've got a new consumption action plan this week. South China Morning Post called it the most comprehensive plan to boost consumption since the 1970s. So, there's a lot in there. It's an incredibly long plan, as all of them are. There's a lot of the, tax breaks and this, that, and the other thing. But there are some very, very strong measures about stabilizing and increasing investment in the stock market, about improving guarantee mechanisms for folks in rural areas. So I don't know if guarantee mechanism means direct cash payment or if we're finally getting closer to that, but I noticed that. Also some things about increasing income for urban and rural residents. Anyway, was there anything in the new consumption plan that excited you, surprised you, or much ado about nothing?
I mean, I've been excited about China since their September Politburo meeting. It is actually one of the best performing markets in the world. And I think that what's very interesting, so if you're listening to this podcast and you just don't follow the markets, what's very interesting is that there was a very clear playbook for when the trade war starts about who wins and who loses. The dollar has to go higher. The US economy is insulated from trade. It's not exposed to trade as much as some of these other places. So if you're an investor, you want to hide in the US, you want to hide in the dollar, you want to hide in big tech companies. You don't want to own Europe, you don't want to own China because they depend on global trade more than the US does. So there's this like narrative out there that US has the room and the luxury to fight a trade war the rest of the world doesn't. And this is, I think, colored President Trump's comfort with tariffs and trade war. Everything that's happened in the world is the exact opposite of that. So again, if you're not following the markets and you're just listening to this podcast for the geopolitics, what's happened over the last 4 months that you may not have been paying attention is the exact opposite of what both Trump and basically every hedge fund on Wall Street thought would happen. And that's fascinating. And so the two big winners of the last 4 months are Europe and China. And I think that this is what's beautiful about the job that we do. I love macro. That's what it's called. Macro investing is amazing. It's like playing chess, but every 6 months to 6 years, chess pieces just decide to move differently. So you can never be too comfortable. And one of the things that I love is how reflexive the world is. This is the term, like when X happens, you think that there's going to be this linear extrapolation of events. But X happening leads to Y. And so what do I mean by this? Well, President Trump is mean. He's going out there threatening a trade war, and countries are responding to it by boosting domestic growth through fiscal policy. And there's this natural rebalancing. America has spent all this money over the last 7 years. It's not just Joe Biden's fault. Trump did it too in his first term. Nancy Pelosi helped him during the pandemic. It's everyone's fault. The US has spent too much money. Government has basically driven growth in the US. The rest of the world has kind of coasted on that. And now here comes Trump, and he says both that we're going to spend less money, although we'll see about that, and we're going to put all these tariffs on you. So the rest of the world is now like, oh, okay, so it's our turn to now support our economy. And I think that's what's happening in China, much less dramatically than some of the announcements we've seen in Europe. But I would say that I think investors, people in our community, Jacob, are way too nitpicky. They're like looking at China and they don't like anything that they've done. It's like, but they're moving in the right direction. It's like you've asked some NBA player to start shooting more threes, and he starts shooting threes, but he's shooting them at like 30%. And you're like, well, look, give him time. Yes, every single announcement since September from China has been piecemeal. Most investors poop on it all the time. Like, oh, that's not enough. This is not enough. I think 12 months from now, we're going to look back at the last 2 years since that September 26, 2024 Politburo meeting. We're going to look back and we're going to say the collection of this poo-poo platter of stimulus policies in aggregate is kind of okay. So yeah, I think that China is doing exactly the same thing that Europe is doing. They're under pressure by America. There's this huge risk that the American market is going to be more difficult to get juice from, to get revenue from. American consumers are going to be a little bit more reticent to buy your goods because Trump is mean. And so you got to boost your own consumption. And that's what's rebalancing growth away from the US. And that's the irony, by the way. Trump is an America First president. But what he is doing is he's causing everyone else to get better at what they do, to fix their economies, to be more, to like start thinking of like in a world where America's mean, what do I need to do? In China's case, like, hey, maybe what you need to do is stop encouraging your population to buy condos, save all their money, like all of them, and encourage them to spend a little bit, like live their life a little, like maybe that's what you should be doing. And I guess it took Donald Trump to convince Canada that it needs more straws in its milkshake. It convinced Europe that maybe it should defend itself and boost its own industry and its development and maybe do some structural reforms. China, maybe you should consume more. So if you're listening to this podcast and you hope that we would be Trump bashing, I mean, in a way, maybe Donald Trump with his meanness is just like, the mean reversion fairy.
Well, this was the point I made on our last episode, which is what I said was there's the strategy of what Trump is talking about, which honestly makes sense on a lot of different levels. And then there's the implementation and the tactics, because you got to think there was a way to thread the needle here without getting all of these different polls to say, oh God, the US is not just mean, it's completely unstable. We really have to look out for ourselves. But I'm going to do a shameless basketball metaphor here. So in your metaphor, China and they're shooting the 3-pointers. You think they're going to be more like Kawhi Leonard, that they're going to learn how to shoot the 3-pointers and become one of the greatest players in the league, rather than DeMar DeRozan, who has obviously learned how and has been told to over and over and over, and just keeps going to the elbow and doing the thing that he knows, and keeps doing it over and over again. So like, is China DeMar or is China Kawhi? Like, where are you on the spectrum?
There is literally 0.7% of humans on the planet who understand that analogy, and this is why we do this podcast. For that 0.7%. We don't care. We got day jobs. We don't need to make money off of this podcast. President Xi is kind of like DeMar DeRozan. Great analogy. I mean, like, amazing player. Like, he's going to be the top. He's going to make top 50 maybe scorers in NBA history. But just kind of stubborn, like that mid-range pull up, like that's his game. And it's like, hey, dude, like if you just kind of shoot more threes, you're going to stretch the floor. And it's like, no. Household debt caused Japan to collapse. I'm going to keep shooting mid-range jumpers. And I don't know. Look, I would say maybe what it takes is mean Trump to get President Xi to realize he needs to rebalance the economy. What's funny, though, is I also do want to say we're sort of mean to China. And what I mean by that is, like, we're all sitting here on the sidelines saying, like, oh, man, it's so obvious. If you have a real estate crisis and your households are deleveraging, the obvious move is for the public sector to leverage. Yeah. And what did we do after our real estate crisis? We tripled down on austerity. What did Europe do after its real estate crisis? It tripled down on austerity. It's really difficult after a real estate bubble to do what's mathematically correct. What we all know, if the GDP per capita is the problem, you want to boost your economy. You want to boost the GDP growth so the GDP per capita comes down faster. You want to deleverage faster. China just hasn't done this because it's difficult. Its moral hazard is the key issue. And so I think they're finally getting to that point, Jacob. So I've been bullish in China. I mean, from a stock market perspective, but what I would say to listeners here is I think that, like just like with Canada and the US and Europe, I think Trump is wakening them up to some of the realities. Like, hey, man, you're going to have to depend on your own consumers to buy some of this stuff you're producing, which is good for the world. It's good for the world because you don't want China to overproduce stuff. That causes political problems, causes geopolitical problems, causes trade wars. If the Chinese consumer kind of wakes up a little bit, it helps everyone.
Mm-hmm. Did you see the news about this Chinese general that was reportedly arrested? Like, there's not a lot of good confirmation of what's going on here, but like that one of the generals that she was closest to and somebody who as recently as January was calling on Xi to punish evil and go after graft, like, is reportedly arrested, although there's been no confirmation, and a lot of what's out there is sort of in English language. This has been a theme, though, over the past couple of years where Xi has been purging the PLA. And I always, whenever people ask me about Taiwan, I'm like, when the purges stop, like, maybe the Chinese military will be ready to even think about Taiwan in terms of its appetite. But do you ascribe anything to that, or has this been on your radar, or no?
Oh, I haven't seen it, but I will say that, the anti-corruption policies in China have also weighed on the economy. So we can dedicate a whole thing to Taiwan at some other point. I mean, we got to get to our moneymaker here, which is the draft. But I think that, I think that this is something that, you should watch. I mean, anti-corruption policies in the military is what you're focusing on. What I would focus on is anti-corruption everywhere else, public sector, finance. China has to kind of like let people breathe a little bit. Otherwise, it will never wake up domestic animal spirits.
Okay. All right. We will stop there. Let's spend the last 30 minutes on our geopolitical sports draft. This is the point at which, if you don't want the geopolitical sports part, you can tune in. This is not just going to be basketball, by the way. I don't know about you, Marko, but most of the things I found were related to the Olympics and all sorts of other strange sports. But if you're not in the 0.7%, you can go away now. And now I turn the MC duties over to you. I get to sit back and relax and let you spontaneously self-combust over there. So go for it.
Okay, cool. So just for everyone to understand, our Lord and Savior is Bill Simmons, and his like this is who we pray to every night. And what he does is he combines sports and pop culture. We're gonna combine sports and geopolitics a little bit. And what I love about one of the gimmicks that they do over there on that podcast is they will have a draft. Why do you do a draft? Because Jacob and I can basically try to pick a team. We're going to do 5 players, a reserve, and a glue guy. So we're going to do 7 events in the world, sporting events that were geopolitically significant. And then at the end, we're going to try to figure out who has a better team, right? Who would win, given like how profound were these events. That's the point. And of course, our viewers and listeners, please tell us whose team do you like more. We're gonna go. The draft goes back and forth. So Jacob, you're gonna start first. The idea, yeah, of course. I mean, I'm going to give you the first pick, and I just want to say, like, the whole point of this is these events. We try to pick sporting events that truly had some geopolitical like implications, some form of a catalyst for something to happen. What I found, and I don't know what you found, Jacob, but a lot of the events that I was looking at really weren't catalysts so much as they captured the zeitgeist or changed it. They were about confidence. They were about pride. They were about nationalism, rebirth. So anyways, I thought that was interesting. So it was difficult to really find sparks and catalysts that caused something. But I'm gonna let you take the first pick. Let's go through it.
It's very kind, and we'll see if I have followed the brief closely enough. But I feel like this is a little unfair because I think there's an uncontested number one pick here, which has to be the 1971 World Table Tennis Ping Pong Championships, where the beginning of the thaw in U.S.-China relations begins with this U.S. ping pong team going and rubbing shoulders with these Chinese players, and eventually you go from that to the original. We don't have to talk about the reverse Nixon. The original Nixon maneuver begins with the 1971 ping pong championship. So I don't know if that follows the brief, though, because it's obvious, like, it's not like the world was watching with rapt attention the competition between the U.S. and Chinese ping pong table tennis teams, but it was used by China and the United States in an encounter between Glenn Cohen, who was the player on the U.S. side, and Zhuang Zedong on the PRC side. That as a result of that encounter, a diplomatic breakthrough between the two sides happened because suddenly they could talk to each other. And it was that initial exchange that happened because of ping pong that you get to Richard Nixon visiting in 1972. You get the Shanghai Communique, which is literally, I mean, that's the bedrock of geopolitics in the South China Sea ever since. The entire multipolar world that we're talking about, probably the emergence, you can begin with China and the United States sort of aligning economically to force the Soviet Union's hand, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I won't wax too philosophical, but I will take the ping pong, 1971 ping pong.
I like it. And one of the things that is very interesting is how many 1969 to 1974 events I have on my list. It was a tumultuous time. Maybe the last time that folks thought it was a multipolar world. The U.S. lost in Vietnam, and it was humbled, and so it was a very, very interesting moment in time. And actually, my first pick is going to come from that as well. So you chose, the ping pong, great pick. U.S. China sets. I want to pick the 1972 World Chess Championship.
Whoa, okay. World Chess Championships.
Yes, Spassky versus Fischer. So the U.S. is rarely an underdog in anything. But in chess, especially 1972, it was an absolute minnow. I mean, it was, first of all, it's the end of the Vietnam War. The Tet Offensive is a couple of years earlier. It's pretty clear. By 1972, most of U.S. troops have withdrawn. It was humbled. Soviet Union was just flexing its muscles. The ping pong diplomacy and the subsequent, Nixon rapprochement with China, which you picked as number one, was a consequence of this malaise, this real in-depth like introspection in America that it had failed. You've got great movies coming out of the United States about this moment in time. They're all about depression. They're great. The Deer Hunter, all this stuff is just like the world just looks terrible. There's an energy crisis coming. There's a hyperinflation coming. And so on one side of this world chess divide, you've got a state-run machine that churns out champions. I mean, nobody had dominated chess the way the Soviets had from the end of World War II to 1972. And on the other hand, you have this chaotic free market, United States of America, which looks like it's failing, right? I mean, 1971, Nixon is forced not just to do ping pong diplomacy, but also to pull out of the gold standard. And so you have this chaotic free market that basically allows a Jew raised by a single mother in Brooklyn to defeat the evil empire. So this is Han Solo versus Darth Vader. This is not David versus Goliath. This is Han Solo on Tatooine just showing up and saying, I'm going to take down the empire. So rarely is America as much of an underdog. And I think that this is an incredible story. It's really and it was a sporting event. It was held in Helsinki. It was televised. It was followed by people around the world. And on a personal note, I can tell you, my grandfather and my great uncle actually followed every game very closely. My great uncle was one of the famous artists, painters in Yugoslavia at the time. And he actually drew this enormous painting of the two. And I remember as a kid going into his atelier and seeing it and just being fascinated. These two men like battling over chess at the height of the Cold War, Soviet Union, the United States. And the reason I'm picking it, it wasn't a catalyst. I'm not sure the ping pong thing was a catalyst necessarily either. It's not like US and China would not have had a rapprochement. But it was like a moment in time. It was symbolic. And I think it was this kernel of hope that a chaotic free market system can produce brilliance to defeat a state-run industrial policy. By the way, interesting thing, Spassky is actually a gentleman. He liked Fischer, they became friends. He wasn't an asshole. He actually spoke perfect English. He was an incredibly well-educated, nice man. But his son, he ended up immigrating to France. And his son became basically a French guy. There's a great YouTube clip where you can watch his son talk about this. The point is that ultimately the competition clearly proved, I think, the superiority of this chaotic free market world where a kid, raised by a single mom can defeat a state-run, empire. Of course, Bobby Fischer went nuts. We should point that out. And so, unfortunately, his mind kind of melted, but I think it's one of the greatest geopolitical events in sports.
When you said 1972, I was terrified that you were going to take another event that happened in 1972, which I almost led with it because as a Jewish general manager, it would have been really hard for me if you had taken the Munich Olympics.
Boom, there
and
we
if
go.
It was on your team and not on my team.
Listen, 1971, 1972, 3 picks. It was a pivotal moment. And by the way, for anyone looking at what's going on right now with the trade tariffs, all this stuff, oh my God, reserve currency, US, blah, blah, blah. Guys, go read 1971, 1972. Watch what Nixon did. It was a similar moment to today, and somehow, yet we survived. But go ahead. One of my favorite events ever. That sounds very bizarre. Let me say that again. One of the most profound events that gives me goosebumps in how it's profound. Not that I support international terrorism. Go ahead, Jacob. Tell us. Munich Olympics.
Aggregators, aggregate that one. Marko Papic's favorite geopolitical event, 1972 Munich Olympics. Ooh. Look, I don't think this is actually, if you're thinking in terms of importance, I actually would rate a couple higher. But like I said, I could not conscience that this event was not going to be on my team. So if you don't know what happened, Black September, a Palestinian, was it part of the PLO? Was it not part of the all that sort of got obscured afterwards, and we still don't really know. But anyway, broke into Olympic Village, took 11 Israeli athletes and coaches and officials hostage, killed killed most of them. Did they kill all of them eventually in the end? I think they were when they were trying to get them on an airplane.
I think everybody died, yeah.
Yeah, yep. Everybody died. And it was really not the beginning of the end, but it changed things in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If you think about geopolitics, it coincided with Jordan basically getting fed up with the Palestinians. That had already been happening a little bit. Like in 1970, King Hussein had declared military rule in Jordan and was expelling Palestinians from there. The relocation of the PLO to places like Syria and Lebanon happens because everybody's like, oh, these Palestinians, they're hijacking airplanes and they're blowing things up. And so the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, the first one, gets sort of wrapped up in all of this. Also, the reputation of the Mossad as this scary group that's going to go around and kill you wherever you're going to be. That happens as the Israeli response to what happens in 1972. It's also interesting because Black September, the PLO, all secular groups. This is before jihadism and Islamism and things like that. Like, we had these conflicts before and they were dressed up in different ideology, which I think is also an interesting point.
Great point.
So I think in terms of like Middle East geopolitics, like Munich 1972 is to the top. In terms of global, it's not there, but I couldn't give it to you.
No, I disagree. First of all, as a Jew, I'm glad you took it. I kind of conceded that to you. I mean, I think I deserve a little shout out. I mean, Bobby Fischer, though, like, Jewish legend, Jewish athletic legend. By the way, watch some of the interviews of Fischer from that time. He was an absolute stud. I mean, supermodel, good looks, like, he was not like what you think. He's not some like, nerdy kid from Brooklyn. Like, no, he looks like a stud. Like, this is 1972, crazy parties. I'm sure he swam in various waters. We're just going to leave it at that. Now, Munich, one of my favorite Spielberg movies. No, false. Favorite movie. Watch it, rewatch it, and watch it again. All of you out there, the reason I love Munich is that he draws you in, he sucks you in, and he makes you cheer for targeted assassinations. He makes the bloodlust come out of you. He makes you say, fuck yes, because somebody gets offed, assassinated. And at the end, he makes you feel really bad about that. What have you learned? The famous ending question, what have you learned? I mean, I got goosebumps. I don't know if the camera can pick this up, but that's all I'm going to say. Watch it. What have you learned is the question the Mossad handler asks Eric Bana at the end. And it's like, and then you realize, like, we have learned nothing. None of us. It's just a cycle of violence. And he makes you feel really bad and dirty for being like, for the movie makes you really want Mossad to kill all these guys. And then at some point you realize, oof, like.
Yeah. At what cost?
At what cost? But anyways, let's go to the next one. For the next one, I'm going to play us a clip because my next one is about millions of people becoming liberated, becoming free. That's what my next one is. So I'm going to pick this and I'm going to let Shane Gillis take it away. Let's see if this is going to work.
White people used to be cool in America. Long time ago, dude. The height of white people being cool was us going, we're like, man. That was as cool as we got. We're like, man, see? And then the day white people stopped being cool, it was Jackie Robinson's first game. You can look it up, dude. You can find it. You can find the radio call from that game online. You can hear the exact moment white people stopped being cool. You can hear the announcers. They still got, they're like, man. Welcome to Chicago, where the White Sox take on the Brooklyn Dodgers. And we all had cool white nicknames. Like, up at the mound is Old Curly. He's a 47-year-old alcoholic. He's the greatest athlete alive. Runs a 6-second 40-yard dash. Fastest man alive, they say. Then it happened, dude. And Jackie came up to the plate. You can hear the announcers like, meh. Coming up to the plate is a young colored boy from Brooklyn. No way he can hit Curly's pitch. Here comes the pitch. Fuck, home run. All right. That was it, dude. Jackie hit the ball so hard he knocked that voice out of all the whites. Not one of us has talked like that since, dude. One swing of the bat, we're like, meh. All right, yeah, that was pretty good. That was good. That was good. It's time for us to focus on computers.
All right, so I'm going to take Jackie Robinson. I mean, very America-centric, you might say, but I disagree. I disagree because the biggest knock on America, this is very important. I come from a different world, right? I was behind the Iron Curtain in some ways, not really. Yugoslavia was kind of in the middle, but Like my family, cheered for Fischer in that Fischer-Spassky rivalry as an example. But the biggest knock on America that the communist world could put is that, basically 15% of its people were second-class citizens. There was apartheid in some way, shape, or form. So I think that Jackie Robinson crushing it in 1947 and knocking the meh out of the white people's voice is extremely geopolitically important. Integration of an ethnic minority into the, into basically citizen status was necessary for the US to become a global hegemon. So I'm going to go with Jackie Robinson, 1947.
All right. A surprising pick, and you've left me with one I didn't think I was going to get, but I'll take it from you. I'm taking the U.S. bronze medal at the 1988 Olympics in basketball, where the team led by the Soviet Union, led by Arvydas Sabonis. Silver, of course, goes to Yugoslavia, a wonderful team with Drazen Petrovic, Toni Kukoc. So I get them on my squad too, Vlade Divac, all of those guys. The U.S. team that won bronze medal, a couple of the guys who were on that team, Mitch Richmond, Bimbo Coles, Hersey Hawkins, Dan Marley was on there. Stacey Augmon, one of my favorite NBA Jam players, because I used to rock the Atlanta Hawks before they were such an awful franchise. They were the first ones to trade Luka Doncic. By the way, let's not give all the shit to Dallas. Like Atlanta, we pioneered that shit. We should get credit for that as well.
Yeah, but Vlade Divac passed on him. But anyways, go on. Yes,
but I think it's geopolitical for a couple reasons. Number one, I think it's a really nice microcosm of the end of the Cold War, because the Soviets, they had Sabonis, they had something that nobody else had. They had this one thing, but it was literally all they had. And they freaked the United States out so much that the United States says, enough of this shit. Let's assemble the dream team and let's completely wipe the floor with all of these bozos. And 4 years later, there is no Soviet Union. Is Yugoslavia still there in 92, or had it fallen apart at that point? I'm not sure yet.
It fell apart. Yes.
It fell apart. And the U.S., led by Jordan and Bird and Magic, became, the kings forever. So you get the sort of microcosm at the end of the Cold War. The Soviets ratchet it up as high as they possibly can, and the U.S. is like, cool. You want to see what it looks like to ratchet it up? We will see your Arvydas Sabonis and give you everybody we possibly have. And then, Yugoslavia, like a little brief moment where they could have been the basketball superpower of the world, torn apart by their own
and we never got to see it. And we never got to see it because of my next pick.
Never got to see it. And also, even the players on that team, I mean, Petrovic and Divac, like they were friends before, right? And didn't they stop talking, or like as a result of the war?
We'll get to that. I mean, it's strange. I mean, you're almost segueing to my pick. You picked number 5, but you should have picked number 6, right? It's a strange pick, I got to say. I didn't even have the bronze medal to the U.S. on my list. So, yeah, so it's a surprising pick. Maybe the first one I would... I think it's funny because, I'm surprised, but great pick. Actually, 1990 World Championship in basketball was the nail in the coffin. So 1988 Olympics, I know Americans just don't care about World Championship in basketball, but that's like your problem. It's not our problem. 1988 bronze medal in the Olympics. 1990, the team that the U.S. sent to Argentina for the World Basketball Championship also fails to get the gold. It was actually Yugoslavia. It was the team you're talking about, Vlade Divac, Petrovic. There was a famous incident in 1990 at that gold medal game. I don't want to pick it, but it was a famous one where a Croatian nationalist kind of runs into the court with a Croatian flag, and Divac takes it and throws it away. And, he gets incorrectly and I think unfairly labeled as a nationalist by, people in Croatia, which of course I understand. I mean, at the time, the emotions were high. And then the war starts, his relationship with Petrovic deteriorates. There's a great movie, by the way, ESPN 30 for 30. I mean, I think one of the greatest sports documentaries ever, called Once Brothers, about their relationship. And I think it's great. But I'm not picking that. I'm picking the 1990, May 13th, 1990. 8-year-old Marko is watching this with his father on the couch. He's watching the game. And 1990, Dynamo Red Star riots.
Okay. There you go.
So we've gotten 5 picks in. This is my 6th pick. This actually could be considered a catalyst for a geopolitical event. I think like a trigger for it. I think that's unfair, obviously, but I think this is as close to a trigger as we're going to get. So what happened was there's a multi-party election in Croatia. a few weeks before this game, and the nationalist, pro-independence, pro-sovereignty parties win. Red Star Belgrade, obviously, legendary team out of Serbia, and Dinamo is the legendary team out of Croatia. Both have produced a ton of talent, especially in the 90s. They meet, and a whole hell breaks loose. The Delije, which is the fans of Red Star, start fighting, start like rioting effectively. Some say that the Bad Blue Boys, as they're called, the Dinamo fans, start throwing rocks at them. It doesn't really matter. The point is, the police doesn't really intervene, and this is important. They let Delije, the Red Star fans, basically destroy the stadium. And then finally, the Dinamo fans had enough. They start fighting, and the police start cracking skulls. So this is a very small nuance that a lot of people don't understand about this. If you go to the Wikipedia page about this riot, you're not going to find this information. The underlying current is that the police forces of every republic in Yugoslavia are usually dominated by ethnic minorities. So the Croatian police officers who are there are overwhelmingly actually not Croatian. They're Serbian Croats. So there's Serbian Serbs who live, Krajina Serbs as they're called. And what's not understood about Krajina Serbs is that they were put there, they were encouraged to immigrate into that part of the world by the Austro-Hungarians so that they would be a militarized group to defend the border against the Ottomans. And so Krajina Serbs, and my father's family is Krajina Serbs, they have a very militaristic, very aggressive sort of outlook, and they tend to be overrepresented in police and military forces. And so when this riot breaks out, I mean, this is happening in Croatia, the police officers to come into the pitch to start beating up the Dinamo fans, you know, like there is an undercurrent there that these are not, you know, that they're not basically a pillar of a Croatian state. That's an undercurrent because ultimately Zvonimir Boban, the best player on Dinamo, drop kicks one of the cops, gets banned for a year, and that's he was protecting one of the Dinamo supporters, and so he becomes vilified, hated in Serbia. I remember being 8 years old and like hating Zvonimir Boban, you know, and it's okay when you're 8 years old. It's okay to be a dumb nationalist, but you know, as you get older, you start realizing certain things. What the Croats wanted was what the Quebec wanted: maître chez nous, masters of our own house. Like this is, you know, why is the police basically favoring, from their perspective, why are they favoring Red Star fans? Why didn't they intervene earlier? Why didn't they get serious, you know, when they were rioting in our stadium? So this becomes wrapped up in nationalism, and obviously it goes into many other, you know, like it becomes, the war starts and a country gets destroyed. Couple of sporting, obviously it's a geopolitical event, but a couple of sporting tie-ins to this. 92, Yugoslavia doesn't go to the Olympics. If Yugoslavia did go to the Olympics, I think Chuck Daly calls a timeout.
Yeah, probably.
That's all I'm going to say. I think Chuck Daly calls a timeout. I'm not saying Yugoslavia wins. No way. Dream Team is the greatest collection of basketball talent, if not athletes. But I do think that Chuck Daly is forced to call a timeout.
Or Michael Jordan gets some sleep on the trip.
Yes, exactly. Maybe before the finals, they're like, hey, man, this kid Dražen and Vlade and Tony, like they call a timeout. But more importantly, this is something that most people don't talk about. Football, soccer. Zvonimir Boban, Croatia, you know, they basically can't go to any competition. 92 Euros, they don't go because it's a war. 92, Yugoslavia is banned from playing in the Euros. Their replacement team, the team that came second in that group, wins the Euro. That's Denmark. Denmark wins the Euro because Yugoslavia doesn't go. And then in 1994, in the United States of America, I will go to bat. I will die. I will fight anyone. I'll fight anyone. I think Yugoslavia wins the 1994 World Cup. Wins the 1994 World Cup in the United States of America because that team was stacked. In fact, in 1998, Croatia comes third with an over-the-hill, aging veteran team that was like probably 55-60% of the Yugoslavia team. So in 94, they would have been young, they would have been in their prime. And that's a sporting tragedy as well as a geopolitical one. Now I'm going to stop here because I can go forever.
Yeah.
Pick number 7.
I'm sticking with the. Well, hold on. Before I do that, I'm going to read you a quote. I'm going to ask you who said this quote. Okay.
Go ahead.
So, quote: "The sportive nightly battle awakens the best human characteristics. It doesn't separate, but unites the combatants in understanding and respect. It also helps to connect the countries in the spirit of peace. That's why the Olympic flame should never die." End quote. Who said it?
I don't know.
Adolf Hitler in 1936, commenting on the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. Also, apparently the first time they had the Olympic flame. See, Munich's your favorite, but 1936 maybe your second favorite. I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't go there. It's the last Olympics that is held until 1948, after the end of World War II. And I think, like my other choice, it doesn't start something the way that your last choice did, which I think gives your team greater depth, more versatility than mine. But again, a microcosm, which is, Germany is hosting the Olympics, thinks it's going to be a signal for Nazism and white Aryans, and they're going to do great. And Jesse Owens wins 4 gold medals, and the rest of the world basically gives Hitler a hint, like, hey, if, as we said last week, you want to fuck around and find out? Okay, fuck around and find out. You're not going to win the gold medals here. Like, you're going to get shown up. And Hitler did not learn the lesson there. So anyway, that's what.
You know what, Jacob? A lot of people, when I said we were going to do this, they mentioned this. What? Like, people would be like, "Wait, you're taking like a draft of like geopolitically important sporting events? Like what? Like Jesse Owens?" And it slid. It slid to number 7, and I think for good reason. For good reason, it slid, because let's be very clear. What did the 1936 Olympics, what did it teach people? Answer: nothing. Hitler wasn't sitting there like, maybe I shouldn't attack the rest of the world. No, he was like, YOLO, whatever.
Well, he was probably sitting there high on speed, not able to complete a coherent thought. But yeah, I got you.
I mean, but like it didn't teach him anything about superiority.
No.
But more importantly, when Jesse Owens went back to the United States of America, there were parts of America where he could not use a bathroom.
Yep.
So this is why I don't like this event. Americans overstate it as some sort of moment of like, oh my God, look at Jesse Owens. Like, he went back to the country and was still discriminated. And Hitler was like, whatevs, I guess Americans will beat us in sprinting. But we got, so that's why I had this thought, like, what's more important? I think Jackie Robinson crushing it and taking the "ma" out of the white people's voice is, I think, far more important than Jesse Owens.
Well, and how much the world changed and how much the United States had changed in that time period. I like 36 because it holds a mirror to all the hypocrisies of the old world and the new world that is coming out. But you're right. It's not dynamic like the way in some of these other events are. So
cool. No, great pick. I mean, I'm going to go with one that I don't think most people know. It's so we're now getting into like, the bench. This is my fourth. Is it my fourth pick? Yeah, this is my fourth player.
Yeah, fourth pick.
So 1969, again, we're circling that kind of, like 68, 75. Lots of things happened then. World was in transition. I'm going to pick the Czechoslovakia-Soviet Union hockey game.
Good, yeah.
1968, Prague Spring. Soviets invade Czechoslovakia. We all figure out they're not softies. There's no thaw. They're baddies. And Czechoslovakia crushes Soviet Union. They win the ice hockey gold. I think it was in Stockholm. In the 69 World Championship, it was 4-3. Riots break out. And this was when the Soviets kind of cracked down on that. Dubček, who basically tried to soften communism in Czechoslovakia, is finally forced to resign. And so, yeah, those riots actually caused Soviet Union to squeeze even further. So it was a kind of a catalyst, and I like that about it. I knew about it when I was a kid. My dad always told me that story, and I loved the chant that the Czechoslovaks had. And the chant they had during the riots was, the tanks were not there, that's why they lost.
Yeah. All right, to round out my starting lineup, I don't know if this is going to fit the rules or not, but it's okay. We're making up the rules as we go, and I'm going to blow your mind here. I am taking the tennis court of 1789. Yes, I have the French Revolution now on my team. I can't believe you left it out there. Has nothing to do with the actual sporting event, but it happened on a tennis court where the French Third Estate says they will not reassemble until the Constitution of the kingdom is established. So now I have the full force, Robespierre, Napoleon. They're all mine. They're all coming on number 5 to destroy your
You know what?
team.
This is like picking Darko Milicic second. You don't know what he's going to bring to the table, but no, it's like picking a 7'8" dude who he doesn't really not Wemby doesn't
Minute
really
Bowl.
walk.
This is my Minute Bowl.
It's Minute Bowl, like doesn't really play basketball, but it's it's the French Revolution. But is it a sporting event? Who cares? Well done, Jacob. This is the one.
It is.
Like starting lineup, I don't know, but like this is good. All right, well,
and I just want to say 2 things about this because there are 2 interesting things here. Number 1, tennis begins like 100 years or 200 years before, not much as the sport as we think of it today, and slowly becomes sort of more mainstream. But it was considered a sport of the aristocracy, of the monarchy. So the reason there is a tennis court, the reason that he has a tennis court is because only the wealthy people play tennis. So there's something really poetic about the people coming to the tennis court and saying, no, we're going to make this oath here. And it's only over the hundreds of years afterwards that it evolves into a sport that everybody wants to play. But you can see in tennis, like the concept of tennis whites, and you have to have specific shoes and all these different rules. Like you can tell it's like a fastidiously French aristocratic thing. And I also want to say, I had 2 of these little wild cards and I went with this one. My other one, though, I couldn't get it down to a single event. But my other wild card, I'm not going to use it, but I just want to say it here, was baseball in the context of the U.S. Civil War. Because like there's all these political cartoons around baseball, and baseball becomes a sport because all these Union soldiers need something to do while they're waiting to invade the South, and so they start playing baseball, and like so that was in there too as I was looking before the 1900s. Anyway,
that's a good one. I think that's a great pick. I'm going to go with a pick that matters to over 1 billion people, and therefore I will win this. Because all my Chinese fans are not going to vote for me, and so you will lose. So this is obscure for the rest of the world, but this really matters to the Chinese. It's the 2004 Olympics. Liu Xiang, Olympic gold medal in 110 hurdle competition. It is the first time that a man of Asian descent wins a track and field event, actually.
Okay.
So this is absolutely the most important sporting event for Chinese people. There is nothing more important than Liu Xiang winning the Olympic gold medal in the 110 hurdles. Obviously, 2008 Olympics in Beijing, he gets injured. His career was cut through injuries, but he remains the most popular athlete in China. And it's right at that moment when China's coming in, and not only do they win a sporting event, but they win one dominated by Americans. I mean, is it the reverse? Jesse Owens? Kind of. And it really, really matters. So I'm going to go with that one. I polled a bunch of I have to admit, I did some deep scouting here. I polled a lot of my mainland Chinese friends, and almost universally, they all said this. So I'm going to go with that.
Interesting. And I love, reverse Kissinger, the reverse Jesse Owens. That's where it's really at. Coined on this podcast.
Boom. There you go.
Boom. It's funny. I thought you were going to steal mine because I was also thinking that I needed some diversity on the squad and to get a few billion people on my side. And my event also goes to 2004. So I was not expecting you to pick a Chinese sprinter. I was expecting you to discuss the Indian cricket tour to Pakistan in 2004.
Good one.
Which marks the normalization, or at least brief normalization, of ties between India and Pakistan. Imran Khan, quoting him, "This tour transcends sports. It is much more than cricket. It is passion." A very different sort of political figure now. And the series heralded a sequence of reciprocal sort of cricket tournaments between 2004 and 2007. Looked like things were going to be going well. And then you get the 2008 attacks in Mumbai and basically killed everything that is there. So the reason I wanted to put this one on my bench is, we're sending this one to the G League. This one needs to work a little bit, needs to work on its game. But when it arises, when India and Pakistan eventually make peace and are playing cricket together, boy, will it be nice to bring in this 6-man off the bench.
I don't actually agree. I think this is a great pick. I think it should be higher. I did have this on my board. I also had another cricket event, the 2009 attack on Sri Lanka team in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Which also, like caused a lot of consternation and all sorts of problems in the region. So cricket, I think underestimated, and I love that you picked that. I'm also going to go with a colonial game, but I'm going to go with rugby, and I'm going to go with another movie. By the way, South Africa World Cup win, 1995. My best friend in middle school when I lived in Jordan was actually from South Africa. And I remember him coming. I didn't know what rugby was in 1995. I was fresh out of the war in Yugoslavia. You know what I mean? And I remember my South African buddy just losing his mind. So this is for you, Paul. This is also for all my other South African buddies around the world. Magesh, they're all going to love this. South Africa wins the World Cup in 1994, straight out of apartheid. And it was a huge moment because this was a huge moment. You want to talk about sporting events that united country. South Africa could have gone the way of Zimbabwe. Could have. And we all know what Nelson Mandela did. And, him embracing this team, which was obviously full of white dudes, because rugby is very elitist sport, not just in South Africa, but really around the world, ironically. And he embracing this team was, I think, a big, big part of the kind of country it was for at least the first 30 years of its existence. So I'm going to shout out that big event. All right. Now we got one more pick. This is the color glue guy. So we got the bench. We got the bench player. Now we got a chemistry guy. Who's your final pick? 13th pick of the draft.
I'm sorry, Marko, if my face looked like it went blank for a second there, it's because I lost my audio for about 10 or 15 seconds, but I was furiously nodding at everything you were saying. I'm sure it was completely brilliant. I have since fixed it. Before I get to the final pick, I just want to shout out a couple of emails that we got.
Oh, yeah, please.
Because I didn't want to steal them, but because, we both got these emails. But Dan emailed us and talked about how if you wanted pre-19th century sporting events, you should look to jousts. And he actually refers to the 1559 jousting tournament where Henry II takes part, marks the signing of the peace of, I can't even pronounce that. Is that Cato Cambrises or something like that? Anyway, he dies 2 weeks later without naming an heir. And Dan asks, would the French Wars of Religion happened if he had lived and not been part of this jousting tournament? So shout out to Dan. That was really good.
Wow. Dan, you're a hero.
Yeah. You are. And then also shout out to Blake, who emailed us both about the football war, the soccer war between El Salvador and Honduras.
Yes, I refuse to fall for that. That is a bad draft pick because nobody cares about that war. No, I'm just joking. It was a great pick, deep pick, but wars in Central America. Come on, 4 people died because 3 of them died of dysentery or something,
Yeah.
I'm just being glib now. I'm sorry. I come from the Balkans. I'm sorry.
No, but
I have high standards for what constitutes a war.
I know. But I'm going to close out here with something really unorthodox and really self-referential. Hold on, I have to find the thing here.
David using a sling against Goliath?
That would have been a good one. But instead, I'm going with the equestrian vaulting U.S. championships from the late 1990s. I forget the exact year. Equestrian vaulting, for those of you who don't know, it's like gymnastics on horseback. It is derived from ancient Roman cavalry techniques where they would be on a horse and they'd flip off and kill a Gaul, and then they'd flip back on the horse and shoot an arrow, really cool things. And yours truly placed second in the United States in equestrian vaulting the end of the late 1990s. And I think that was one of the most geopolitical moments you could possibly think of in the world, young Jacob taking the world by storm. Now, I placed second, but there were 3 boys in the entire United States who competed in my age group. And I'll also have the guy who placed first, he was fucking cheating. He should have been in the league a year up, but they put him in just because they wanted him to compete anyway. So I'm taking equestrian vaulting and myself because that's how humble I am. There you go.
Whoa. I did not know this about
blew your mind.
Wait, what? Equestrian vaulting. Wait, are you secretly...
Oh, and actually, billionaire? I don't know if you can. Oh no. My mom ran this nonprofit that helped kids with autism. They would ride horses as part of their therapy, and she was too cheap to afford a babysitter. And they were doing this equestrian vaulting thing on the side at the same barn where she was doing the horseback riding for the autistic kids.
So you're like Bobby Fischer of vaulting.
Exactly. And I don't know if you can see it, but I have it behind me is my silver medal. Is somewhere over here on my wall.
I'm
for my
in
achievement.
presence of athletic royalty. I'm truly speechless. I have nothing to take myself. So,
Which is probably good for you. I just wanted myself on this team so I can sit next to, Jesse Owens and Robespierre.
All right. Well, here's what I'm going to take then. I'm going to take a marker of multipolarity. Okay. The advent of multipolarity, and it's really a trend. So this is the color glue guy, right? So we can go and pick ourselves as Jacob did. Fine. Or we can just go and pick our favorite team and our favorite player, Luka Doncic, to the Lakers in 2025. Why? Hear me out. Here are the last 7 MVPs in the for the NBA. 2018, James Harden.
Mm-hmm.
That is the last American who won it. 2019, a Greek. 2020, a Greek. 21, Serbian. 22, Serbian. 23 is Cameroonian, who Americans had to recruit for their team to beat Serbia in the Olympics, but let's leave that aside. Okay, fine. 24, Serbia. 25, probably Canada. When will an American win an MVP this decade? Will it happen? With Luka in LA now, I don't know. I mean, it may not happen. So I'm going to take, multipolarity, and shout out to my good friend, the most successful Slovenian in the world, who will remain anonymous, not Luka. He picked this one, obviously, for Homer reasons, but, God bless him. So I'm going to pick that one. But if you want multipolarity reflected in sports, you can go with the MVP race in the NBA. But if you're not a basketball fan, we can also go with Ohtani pitching to Trout in 23 World Baseball Classic, which, Japan won. I mean, forget basketball. Basketball is and was always an international game, despite the 92 Dream Team dominance. But baseball, I mean, when you think baseball, it is America's game. And yet in 23, Ohtani basically wins it for Japan. So that is mine. I don't know what you want to call that, but I'm just going to call it sporting multipolarity. A couple of ones that we didn't pick, interestingly. Neither one of us picked a highly ranked recruit that probably a lot of people thought we were going to pick. Beijing opening ceremony in 2008. It's post-GFC, total economic global meltdown. Lehman happens a few weeks later. Georgia invasion happens while the Olympics are happening. Literally Bush and Putin are like, what's up? They're there. China suddenly seemed like an alternative. And I would say that it's funny we didn't pick this one. I know you're kind of scoffing at it, but I do think that ceremony did wake Americans up to like what China is and what they are. And I think it may have also led Beijing to overestimate their own strengths. So it made them get too high on their own supply a little bit. So this whole Beijing consensus comes out of that Olympics. Then neither one of us, this was on my board. I chose, since you picked yourself, I decided not to pick this one and go with the multipolarity Luka Doncic thing. 1990, West Germany wins the World Cup. Unification, right? Neither one of us picked Maradona's Hand of God, which, and the reason is post-Falklands, kind of was sticking it to the English, right, for the Falkland War. So that was interesting. Summit Series, very important to the Canadians, Canada versus the Soviets. 1972, another one of those 1972 evil Soviets getting defeated. 1992 Dream Team, neither one of us really picked them. You picked 1988, which was a catalyst. No, that's good. And then finally, US versus Canada, 2025. Canadian nationalism is on the rise. And I think that event may end up costing us, because I think that event will go play in EuroLeague and really, really have a great career and then come to the NBA. Because I think what's happening in Canada is very interesting. So let me go through the teams. By the way, did you have anyone on the list that we didn't pick?
Yeah, just honorable mentions. You and I both did this in different ways. You picked Jackie Robinson and I picked Jesse Owens. But the 1968 Olympics and John Carlos and Tommy Smith raising their hands at the medal platform, that's in there. Also, I mean, I had on my list there, Muhammad Ali opting not to join the armed forces. Like, there wasn't a particular moment or fight there, but his role in American politics and in the context of Vietnam. Like I was thinking about working that in. You also picked 69 Czechoslovakia hockey. I had 1956 Soviet Union Hungarian water polo match on my list, which I thought was pretty good. The Hungarians.
Yes.
Tanks are rolling into Budapest. The Hungarians are picking fights with the Russians during the semifinals. The Hungarians go on to win the gold medal in water polo. And then, I had a sense that there was not enough soccer here in general, but I had the 1934 World Cup with Mussolini. It was hosted in Italy. Mussolini wanted to use it as his version of 1936, where he was going to show how great fascism was. And the Italians actually won too. Of course, like most of South America is not really competing, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I thought that was in there as well. But I think overall, I think we did a decent, good job.
Speaking of World Cups, 1954 Switzerland. That was the World Cup in Switzerland. West Germany wins that. That was part of that rehabilitation and kind of momentum. So let's
and I'm sorry, there's one more thing. I don't know my ancient history enough to know this, but the concept of the Olympics in general was that Greek city-states would not fight each other. They would come together and have an Olympics instead of killing each other. So like I said, I don't know my ancient Greek history well enough to know, well, it was the Olympics of 435 when Sparta and Macedonia decided not to blah, blah, blah. So I'm sure there's one in there and that some angry classic historian will come in and email us about what we missed. But anyway, shout out to them.
Wait, hold a second. Did we miss the obvious one? Somebody on Twitter actually shouted this out at me. The original marathon.
We did. And,
Battle of Marathon, right? The dude actually runs, 42 kilometers and tells the Athenians what happens and then dies. The man dies. And then we're like, you know what we should do? We should make that a sporting event.
We should make that so it's not a sporting event. I know, but it's not. Well, I took the French Revolution, so what am I poo-pooing the rules there?
Okay, so let's go through the teams. Let's go. I know we're pushing 2 hours, but hey, we warned you. We warned you this was for 0.7%. If you're still here, it's not our fault. It's your fault. You should have just dropped that. So let's go through
although
the teams.
If we stay much longer, my wife's going to take my head. So
all right, just to summarize the team, Jacob's team is 1971 ping pong, 1972 Munich Olympics, 1988 bronze medal to the U.S., 1936 Olympics in Berlin, lots of Olympics. 1789 French Revolution, well done. 2004, this is a great pick. Indian cricket tour, well done, Jacob. Currying favor with obviously South Asia. And then closing it all out is Jacob Shapiro. All right, equestrian, vaulting.
Yes,
well done. All right. Marko's got 1972 World Championship in chess during the height of the Cold War. 1947 Jackie Robinson in the U.S. 1990 Dinamo Red Star riots that led to the dissolving of Yugoslavia. 1969 Czechoslovakia Soviet hockey. Liu Shang Olympic gold medal. 2004 in 110. Obviously, I'm just pandering to China there. 1995 South Africa World Cup win. And then finally, 2025, sporting multipolarity. Who's going to be the MVP out of the U.S.? Maybe we won't have one for 10 years. Thank you so much. And thank you very much to Mrs. Shapiro. I will send you some flowers. Thank you for borrowing Jacob, for lending Jacob to us. I think we did it. It's less than 2 hours, by the way, but it is 2 hours.
It's 2 hours, and the listeners will enjoy. So we'll leave it there, and we'll see y'all next week.